Hello and welcome to the Big Yearning podcast. We are two life coaches who really enjoy meaningful discussions about big questions. Our work and our lives have been very much shaped by these questions, and they've taken us to some amazing places in our lives and within ourselves. We all long for things. We all carry big yearnings in our hearts, and over the next hour or so, we hope to touch on some of these yearnings and perhaps give you some ideas or insights to help you be clearer about what you long for and how to get it. Hello everyone, and welcome to episode 21 of the Big Yearning podcast. My name's Neil. I'm the one who's strong on mindfulness, calmness and slowing down, but who sometimes struggles with speeding up when I need to get faster in life.
And my name's Alexander, and I'm the one who focuses on determination and strength and growth, but I often forget to be present and enjoy what's actually going on around me.
So a very, very warm welcome to those of you who have tuned in to us before, and also to those of you who are tuning in for the very first time. If throughout this episode there's anything that stimulates your interest, please do share that with us. We have both a Facebook page and an Instagram page for the Big Yearning podcast, and we had quite a few new followers on those two platforms in recent times. And those are places where you can leave any comments, ask us any questions, and request topics that you would like us to cover. In recent times, we've had a couple of episodes that relate to people's direct requests for topics for us to cover. So please do keep those coming in. We really love to hear your feedback. The podcast thrives on your feedback. It's something that me and Alexander really love doing, but it's nothing without the kind of feedback that comes in to spur us on and keep us going. If you want to get in touch with us individually, we'll let you know how you can do that at the end of the podcast. And for people who have been listening on a regular basis, you'll know that before we start talking about our topic, me and Alexander have a check-in. A check-in is something that me and Alexander do outside of these podcasts. And that's been particularly important for both of us, I think it's true to say, during lockdown, to keep us connected when avenues for social contact are much more limited. And the reason for doing a check-in is that really, I like to think that it keeps us honest and true and real and authentic. We're a couple of kind of real human beings who show up here. Yes, we're doing a podcast for all of you folks to enjoy. And at the same time, it's important for us to speak truly to what's going on for us in our lives at the moment. So the check-ins for us are really important. So with no further ado on that score, Alexander, how are you today?
Thank you, Neil. I am pretty good, thank you. I'm feeling a little bit lightheaded right now. For the first time in my life, I am experimenting with intermittent fasting. I've had years of people telling me how good it is for you, but things have always held me back, and I've always kind of avoided actually diving into it. So I am 15 hours into my second day's fast. I've got another hour to go, and then I'll be allowed to start eating. So I'm quite looking forward to that. And I'm just getting used to what my body does while I'm doing this fasting stuff. It's interesting. There's a lot of interesting science going on inside my body right now. And I'm just aware of the effects that has on my thinking and my feeling. And just trying to kind of track the experience, I guess. So that's big for me right now. I've had a big influx of clients in the last few weeks, like coaching clients coming forward. And that is so exciting for me. I just love when someone books in for a consultation and we get to talk about what's going on for them, what they're really passionate about, what they're missing, what they want, and then we start doing the work together, and it's this amazing adventure that you go on together of being able to say things that you could never say before and finding strategies and techniques to being able to kind of get places. It's just so fun and so exciting. So as those clients come forward, I'm just loving it. It's really bringing me back to life. It's bringing me back to the way things are meant to be in my life. So I'm very grateful for that. Another thing that's big for me at the moment is sort of the incremental returning to normalcy. So just beginning to take those steps back into the world. Obviously, we're nowhere near the end of the situation in the UK. the vaccine is beginning to be rolled out, and that's great. But just noticing for myself, my thinking and my feeling around the little things I'm beginning to do. So as I'm out walking and I notice that more and more people are gathering around me and there's a bit of a crowd, and then begin to feel quite uncomfortable about that. We're not ready for this. I don't feel comfortable in this space. And then if I'm not mindful of that, then I start feeling quite angry in those situations, and I start feeling quite bitter about it. But if I trace that back, that's just to do with my fear and my unfamiliarity and my discomfort. And so I just take myself away from those spaces. And alongside that, there is just my plans for the year, the things that I want to complete as part of my 5-year plan, which I've talked about quite a lot on the podcast, things that I want to do to grow my business, and just thinking about the steps that I want to take that would even have been difficult for me a couple of years ago when I was, moving full speed ahead, meeting up with people all the time, not having been in lockdown for a year. Just that extra level of challenge and complexity and emotional turbulence that's around, okay, I also have to learn to step outside again. I need to learn to be in busy spaces. I need to learn to reach out and be a leader in the world again. And it's just interesting. I'm just trying to take good care of myself through that process, while not letting myself hang back through fear or through unfamiliarity and discomfort. That's a big thing for me at the moment. And then the other thing I just wanted to touch on today is the murder of Sarah Everard in London has brought up a lot of things for me and for many of my close friends. And it's been quite turbulent. It's re-traumatized a lot of women I know. I have been dragged into some big debates and arguments online on social media, which isn't something I generally get involved in. And it's just really reminded me about the progress that we still have to make, that men have to make in terms of understanding our behavior and acting appropriately and dealing with the privilege that we're born into, and the internalized lessons that women take on through the education that our culture pushes on them. And just this enormous tangled mess that we live in. We talk a lot in this podcast about unpicking the things that our culture does to us and the toxic lessons that we pick up during our upbringing and during our daily lives. And I think this is absolutely at the heart of that. So that's just been big for me lately. Difficult, painful conversations with female friends, challenging conversations with men who are going through new stages in their evolution around this. Perhaps they realized this stuff a while ago and now they're just fed up with constantly having to bite their tongues or behave in certain ways, and having to remind guys that is privilege, guys. That the chance that you can just switch off and not engage with this stuff, that is your privilege at work, and mine. Encountering my behavior around this and reminding myself that I, as a man, have an obligation to step up and combat this toxic stuff. So that's been really big for me lately as well. I think I've had, that's really been a significant part of the last while for me. So, yeah. So all that together, that big mishmash, that's how I am. That's my check-in. Thank you, Neil.
Thanks, Alexander. For me, I feel good in this moment. I'm really looking forward to the podcast. It's a topic which I think I've got a lot to learn from, and I'm really interested to see how our discussion evolves, because I know that we have different positions on this, but I think a different experience of willpower. I think that's more accurate, really. So looking forward to today's podcast. In terms of myself, I've had a few struggles recently with getting knocked off of balance. I've had a few physical aches and pains. I have a real weak spot in my back. When I get really kind of stressed and a bit overwhelmed, then my back kind of goes. My back's gone at the moment. But I'm trying to, I think, just approach these kind of struggles and challenges in a different way. And I was thinking this morning that I can be knocked off balance, but I don't have to fall over. I don't have to crash over onto the ground. So when I feel myself getting a little bit unbalanced or a bit wobbled, I really try and catch myself and think, okay, what can I do differently? What inner resources can I pull upon? what support externally can I get? I think last time I checked in with this notion of equanimity and how that's kind of really important to me. So I continue to kind of work with that throughout my days. And I think being a self-employed life coach really asks me to kind of step up in terms of my own self-care and my own sort of self-regulating, if you like. And funnily enough, that's a challenge I really welcome, because I think it's a really important part of my growth and development. A couple of years ago, that being hit off balance might have just kind of put me onto the floor, and I might not have got up for a few days. But I feel like I'm a different person now. So to be feeling like I'm a different person is lovely. Is really quite different from me. So that's good. I'm really enjoying my narrative coaching course. That's just going so well. I kind of wish I discovered that material about over 30 years ago when I first started out working with people in a helping capacity or a therapeutic capacity. And I really feel with the course that I have landed amongst a group of like-minded people and found some kind of therapeutic home, if you like, some kind of place of belonging where I can finally sort of say some things that might have been a little bit heretical to say in the past in terms of what the work means to me and how I think it works in relation to working with clients. So that's been really nice. The final thing is a small thing, but it made me think a bit more seriously about something. My iPod officially crashed and broke and is no more. That happened yesterday. Tried to get it fixed from my regular computer guy. And everybody listening think, is Neil still using an iPod? And yes, I was. I know it's kind of very old tech, but I was really attached to it. So I haven't really been playing any music for the last couple of months. And so I bit the bullet yesterday, signed up to Spotify, ordered myself a Bluetooth speaker, which hopefully is coming today. And it made me think about the importance of music in my life. And it made me think that I have my own little pet theory about me and music, or music in general, based on my experience. And that is that I think that for men, music is one way through which they can openly show their emotion in a culture which often looks negatively upon men expressing their emotion. So I've had that pet theory for a while, and it's certainly true for me. So last night I just kind of tuned into a bit of a few songs, and there's something about for me music is the most significant and important art form in my life, the one that I gain most joy and sustenance from. And I think it's that very basic thing about someone else is creatively, artistically articulating something that I feel. It's usually something I feel as opposed to something I think. So in terms of self-care and good things I can put into my life, I'm really pleased to be reminded of how important that aspect of, that sense of an aesthetic, a sense of something artistic, something creative in my life. That's really important. So in spite of broken iPod, it's good that I've got to the point where I am today in terms of appreciation. Yes.
Thank you, Dale.
Okay, so those are our check-ins.
Before we go on, I'm aware that one of our regular listeners is a very talented sports therapist who lives in Brighton, and he said to me the other day that he can't wait to get his hands on your back because he's fascinated to find the link between the experience you have of your back and your emotional kind of experience. So just to warn you that the next time you're in Brighton, you might get poked by this man.
Okay, right. That is news to me, but very welcome news. Thank you, Alexander. Great. Now, I could do with some help with that. Yeah, again, that's another one of those post-lockdown things and another kind of self-care thing. A few years ago, I had some really, really good shiatsu on it, which is really good. And it's so interesting, how I sort of think, oh yeah, I must go back. But, these kind of small yet relatively small yet significant things around self-care, do I do it? I don't always do it. So it's a really good reminder. So thank you. I look forward to getting poked. Yeah. And manipulated down in Brighton next time. Okay, so moving on to today's topic. Today we're going to be talking about willpower. And we're very aware that different people have different relationships with the concept of willpower and the individual notions of will and power separately. And I think it's fair to say that both me and Alexander, we have differing experiences of this, really. It's fair to say, I think, for you, Alexander, and of course you'll speak for yourself later on, that willpower is a concept that you readily kind of use in your life and in your work. You're relatively familiar and comfortable with it. Whereas for me, willpower is a concept that I don't readily refer to, and to a degree I struggle with. I do struggle with aspects of it. I will speak to the nature of my struggles with willpower later, but what I will say for now is that I'm really looking to unlearn, if you like, an old story of willpower that I've created for myself and create a new story around willpower, one in which I learn to harness my own power and use it to good effect. So when I do my bit later on, I will speak about some of the obstacles I've found, but hopefully for me, this is about harnessing my own power in a clean and conscious way. Okay, so over to you, Alexander, for your introductory piece on this topic.
Thanks, Neil. Yes, I think it's fair to say that the idea of willpower, the ideas of will and power are pretty familiar to me. They're something that I talk about quite readily. We're going to be talking a little bit about archetypes today, I think, and we're going to be touching on these kind of 4 core archetypes that are driving factors for all people. And the warrior archetype is something I'm just very comfortable with. And I owe that in a large part to martial arts, and I'll be talking about that today, just to kind of unpack how I came to understand this idea of willpower. I'm a philosopher through and through. If you cut me open, it would say philosopher in the middle. If there's a concept, I want to understand it. I want to spend time understanding what people have said in the past about it, where the evolution of this idea came from and how it's transformed over the centuries. I want to get to the deepest possible understanding of it. And willpower is an interesting one for me because it was something that just wasn't part of my early life. I feel like a lot of the lessons that I got in my early life were quite passive. They were quite allowing, and they were just what they needed to be at that time. I think I started in a place where I didn't understand this idea of willpower. I just want to take a step back before I dive into that any more fully. We're talking here about developing willpower. So wherever you are now, this is about how do you get more of this thing? And in coaching and in this podcast, we talk a lot about removing barriers. We talk about encouraging flow. We talk about creating a lifestyle that works for you. We talk about becoming more aware of your emotions and your needs and your values so that things are more aligned in your life, so that you're able to do things more easily. And that's really important. It's really important to understand the blocks and the barriers and the limiting beliefs. That is important stuff. But that said, there will be times when we all have to do things that we don't want to do, or that are difficult, or are frightening, or things that are boring, or things that we do have emotional or mental blocks around. Things still need to get done. So that is where this particular component comes in. Today, we're not really talking about how do we create a nice life where we flow between things. How do we get more of the things that we want and less of the things we don't want? We're talking about you are presented with a challenge. You are presented with a thing which you don't have an inherent motivation to do, but it needs to get done. How do you motivate yourself and drive yourself into action and then sustain that until the thing is done? And I think we'll also be talking about how do you look after yourself through that process? How do you not go so overboard with this that you end up burning out or hurting yourself or trying to live up to some expectation which isn't realistic for you? So I think that's what we're talking about. Is that fair, Neil? Do you feel that's what we're covering today?
Yeah, I think that's fair, Alexander. And, I do think it's a really kind of creative tension sort of situation here, I hope, with me and you, because we do have different experiences of this. So I'm very much looking forward to, for myself certainly, and hopefully for those people listening, to see this thing from many different aspects, from many different sides. Because I think, like when I did my introductory bit, I said that both me and you are very aware that everybody will be on a kind of different spectrum with this kind of stuff. You know, some people will be so sort of lack a great deal of willpower, find it difficult to kind of drive and move ahead with things. And other people might need to kind of tone it down a bit, you know, at the other end in terms of. But I think we'll speak to that certainly with the piece on the archetypes. Yeah, sure.
Okay.
Yeah. So thank you for that. For me, I'll speak now a little bit to some of the struggles I've had, and this might, you know, I want this to kind of generalize out. So this may speak to other people's experience as well. It isn't just about me, but, you know, I'll start from me in terms of a place of learning. So similar to you, actually, I had I think you used the word passive. My upbringing was quite kind of passive. I didn't have really kind of strong parental role models in terms of getting things done, you know, achieving stuff. So somehow I've learned this notion that willpower is about force and opposition and conflict. I've got a lot of those kind of associations or connotations with it. And, you know, I'm kind of averse to conflict and opposition. So there's no reason why, you know, willpower should manifest like that. But it does for me. And I think sometimes it's difficult for me to kind of tune into my own power, my own sense of my own empowerment. Also, I've kind of taken on this notion, which might be true for other people, that it's kind of like, you know, willpower is about power over. It's about imposing myself on someone else or other people to their detriment. And I think that's one of the kind of stories, if you like, that I want to kind of unlearn. But that's one of my kind of working models, which needs some kind of adjustment, really. I think also I'm reminded of this line in the Serenity Prayer of, God grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change. Sometimes when I think of willpower, I have this image of someone who believes that through their own individual act of strength and will, they can get absolutely anything done. And for me, even though I'd love to have some more of that oomph, sometimes I worry that that stance in an extreme way doesn't take into account social factors through which you actually can't do anything. And then the trick becomes, okay, I've encountered something that I truly can't do something about. How do I take that on board? How do I work with that? Not to get defeated, in inverted commas, by it, but how do I kind of work with it? So that's one thing for me. And then lastly, I'm very wary of, this is another phrase which I kind of struggle with, pushing on through. And I think, you know, that's something I hear in our culture, got to push on through, whatever. And again, I need to find different language for that kind of energy, if you like. And my experience of applying that pushing on throughness to myself is that sometimes it damages me because I don't know where the line is around continuing to do something because it's a good thing to continue doing, even though I might feel a bit challenged or a little bit depleted or a bit tired. I don't know where that line is in terms of me falling into, okay, this isn't good. I'm pushing too hard. I'm pushing against a brick wall. So one way of seeing that kind of dilemma or that dynamic is if there's something for me to do, an action to perform, then one end of the spectrum is like being completely hands off. And I can be very hands off with some things. I can be very avoidant. That's a bit of a tendency of mine. And then at the other end of the spectrum is being really full on, real kind of bull in a china shop, maybe with not a lot of awareness. And this is where the archetype theory comes in that we'll talk about a bit later. So for me, the challenge is to find that line where I'm continuing, I'm working hard with something, there's a degree of push, there's a degree of discomfort, but when does that lurch into me kind of damaging myself? And just to be clear, when I say damaging myself, it's not, sometimes it's through sort of physical tiredness, but more so it's a sort of damage to my soul. I'm kind of overriding my better interest. I'm kind of overriding my better self. It's more a kind of psychological, emotional sort of damage that I'm kind of doing myself, emptying myself to a point where it would take a long time to fill myself up. So just to clarify that, that's what I talk about when I say damaging to myself. So, yeah, I don't know if there's any of that you want to respond to, mate.
Yeah, I think that's a very important word of caution around this subject. I have known clients and friends who have burnt out in quite significant ways, and there have been months or years of their life where they're effectively housebound and unable to think clearly, feel very much at all. And I have seen people damaged by this stuff. So while today we're talking about developing willpower and becoming more effective at doing the hard stuff, yeah, maintaining that that awareness and that self-care, the things are absolutely not exclusive, I would say. You don't... Well, I mean, I say that they're not exclusive. I think for a lot of people they can be. I think for a lot of people, I'm thinking particularly really driven, perhaps career people or people who really want to achieve a certain goal, who have a drive which comes from probably an unconscious source, and they are just propelled to keep acting, keep striving, keep succeeding. Those are the kind of people who are open to that kind of damage. I mean, we're all open to it, but it's that when we go into those extremes of I will do this no matter what, it is important to have that cautionary aspect and to be able to balance these things. As I say regularly on this podcast, we're complex beings and we're able to occupy multiple states at the same time. And it's okay to be deeply self-caring, deeply self-loving, to be aware of our needs and our well-being and our okayness, and hold ourselves through adversity and difficulty and pushing ourselves to do things that are hard. Those things are not exclusive. It's difficult because the energies, the feeling of them is so oppositional, or at least so different. But it's achievable, and I hope that balance comes across through our conversation.
Yeah. Thank you.
Okay. Shall I talk a little bit about my background with this then? Since
yeah,
go
ahead.
That I feel comfortable with this stuff.
Sure.
So in my sort of mid-teens, I'll just do a little bit of history, and then what I'm going to try and do today is try to talk about my evolution of these ideas and how I came to understand the things that I now understand, because it was incremental and experiential and the kind of these steps that I went through. I'm hoping that along the way I'll say things that are helpful and useful for listeners to hear. So
I'm sure you will.
I'll give it a go. So in my mid-teens, I was sent to a karate class, and it was totally unfamiliar to me. It was totally unlike. I was a very sensitive boy. I was in a public school at the time where I felt very alone and ostracized, and I wasn't performing very well at anything, and I was just very confused a lot of the time. And I was sent along to this karate class, and there's all these people in white uniforms standing in odd ways and occasionally shouting. And I remember crying in my first lesson and not really knowing what to do with this. But I was sent back. This was a thing that wasn't negotiable. My mum had got advice from a health professional, a medical professional, that this was something that would be really good for me. And so I was made to go for about 3.5 years. And through the experience, I learnt a great deal that I didn't realise I was learning at the time. So if you think about the martial arts experience, I'm a massive believer in martial arts, by the way. Hands up, I'm just going to talk very positively about martial arts. I think it's wonderful. So through the experience and through going to these classes for years, I learnt a great deal. So karate in particular, that's the thing that I have experience of. There's an awful lot of discipline involved. There is ritualistic kind of beginnings and endings to what you're doing. You are trying to perfect certainly in your Q grade, so that's everything before black belt, you're trying to perfect the basic techniques and the basic kata. A kata is a series of techniques that are strung together that you perform all together. And the more precisely you do that, the more precise your posture, your stance, your balance, your technique, the power with which you deliver things, and the spirit that you bring to those actions, the more likely you are to pass your next grading. And you're constantly being assessed on this by your sensei and the other teachers. They're walking around you, they're telling you to bend that knee more, they're telling you to hold that stance. And a lot of it is very, very uncomfortable. It is civilized, nice people learning to be violent. So it is standing in a painful position for minutes or hours at a time. Your legs are screaming at you. They are building up lactic acid. You are developing muscle tissue. It hurts. And certainly, I was a little teenager, and so every time the teacher would turn their back, I'd stand up. Thank you very much. Don't want to be doing this anymore. But as the years went by, and as I became more senior, and as you're expected to perform at a higher and higher level, you learn to keep the stance. You learn to stay down. You learn to keep your center of gravity low. As you spar, you understand why you keep your center of gravity low. You also hit things. You are swinging your fists. You are kicking with your legs. You are shouting as you're doing it often. That is called ki. It is the delivering of force. It does a number of things. It tenses your core so that your technique is delivered with more force, but it's a releasing of spirit. It is an intention. A karate teacher of mine from a late part of my life said that he was walking down an alleyway one time and someone jumped out at him, and he was surprised. He didn't have time to react to anything, but he delivered a ki. He yelled at the top of his voice in a way that was frankly terrifying, and the person ran away. He didn't have to do anything except deliver his ki. So you are developing a spirit and a focus of determination and power and courage and fortitude. And you are meditating around doing these things, and you're meditating in an uncomfortable posture, or at least for me, it's very uncomfortable. So that hurts as well. And yet you're expected to hold it. And I've also gone back to study karate in a number of clubs in my adult life. I'm a member of a karate club in Brighton. So what happened for me was I had to learn to hold these postures, these stances. I had to learn to deliver power and force and violence. You're being told what this will do to a human body while you're doing it, and you're being encouraged to think about those things. So that was an experience I had, but I didn't really know what to do with that. There was no intellectual understanding of that. I was learning the spirit of karate. It was only when I went to study philosophy that I started kind of understanding what that was. And then as I started studying psychology and personal development and some native wisdom, I started understanding what that is in me. Now, in my book, I talk about the thing that I talk about often on this podcast, which is the 4 aspects of the human person, of being body, mind, emotion, and spirit. But I also talk about the I in my book. The I as in the letter I, as in the being who is experiencing all these things, this kind of core identity. It's a thing that I've just noticed coming up over and over again in my study of philosophy, when I studied Nietzsche and Schopenhauer, and they had this very strong idea of will as this continuous driving, almost animalistic force that just compels us to act. As I studied Kierkegaard and the existentialists about becoming more and more aware of yourself and choosing what you're going to do with your will, with your identity, with the capacity to act that you have, I just began to realize that it's something totally separate from any of these 4 aspects of who we are. The will to act is the potential that exists between I would like and it happening. So now, when I go to my karate class and I hold the stance, my body tells me it hurts. And I acknowledge that my body is telling me it's hurting, but my will compels me to stay there. And I never really understood. So I spent 17 years as a vegetarian, and I would often have conversations with people who weren't vegetarian, sort of saying, I couldn't do that. I love meat too much. I love meat. I adore meat. I used to absolutely relish having a meat meal, but that doesn't mean I have to do it. I have the will to be able to choose not to do it. So rather than my body going, oh, that's a nice sensation, I want that, and then immediately springing into action, rather than my emotions saying, I don't want to do this, it feels uncomfortable and unsafe and frightening or boring or disinteresting, and me going, okay, well, thank you, emotion, I must follow what you tell me to do. Or rather than my mind saying, I don't understand how to solve this problem, and therefore can we not do it, please? And me going, okay, well, this is, my mind doesn't know how to do this, so I'm going to give up. Those are all information that is fed through to me, to this I, to this willing being. But I am separate from those things, and I can choose what I do with my time. I choose everything that I do. Choice is a big thing for me. If you read my book, I'm big on choice. And the part of us that chooses is our will. It is the force that can act. And if we can step into that and understand what that means, so it's something separate from my impulses and my needs and my thoughts and my immediate feelings, and we can find this irrepressible directedness, which is separate from those things, that is what I call upon when I need to do something boring or scary or difficult. I am aware that I'm bored. I'm aware that I'm scared. I'm aware that this is going to be hard. I'm aware that I am uncomfortable. I'm at the gym and I'm training and I'm on my last set and my whole body is shaking and it hurts and I am exhausted, and yet my will compels me to do the last set. I have been rambling for some time, Neil. I hope some of that was useful to somebody listening. What did you think?
Firstly, I'm sure it was, yes, and certainly useful to me and for me. There's some really pretty deep philosophical questions in there, I think, particularly around choice. And I know that in your book, you're big on choice. And as you were talking, I was thinking about some things that probably aren't the remit for this podcast. So I was thinking about philosophical traditions that maybe don't have such a strong sense of I. So I was thinking about the kind of the Buddhist philosophy, whereby I is something more transient and kind of conditional, really. But that's probably another podcast or 3 or 4 or 5.
I mean, it's really interesting stuff, mate. I mean, I really had to wrestle with really, really liking a lot of the aspects of Buddhism, and yet being drawn to more shamanic traditions, which are heart and passion focused. I guess that's we draw from traditions what we need, and we end up aligned with what makes sense for us and what works for us.
Yeah, definitely. I'm a great believer that I, as a human being, seek out those things which, to a degree, fit my predisposed beliefs and views and patterns. Again, that's another podcast, isn't it? But one thing that did pop up for me was so if I heard you right, will is really this capacity to act. And so then that makes me think about, okay, the capacity to act in relation to what? So then that makes me think that, okay, I've got this capacity to act, but what does it serve? Okay, and maybe this point is a good juncture to move into the archetype theory, because it seems
that would be great, mate. Yeah.
So it seems to kind of flow in. So when I was thinking about this podcast topic, I turned to a particular set of ideas to help me understand it, and I think that's been fruitful in my understanding. And those ideas, namely, are Jungian archetypal ideas around a 4-quadrant model of the personality, and that is sovereign, warrior, magician, lover. That came to the public notice most famously, I think, back in the 1980s, when a couple of American psychologists, Douglas Gillette and Robert Moore, wrote a book around men's development called King, Warrior, Magician, Lover. So I've substituted sovereign for king, because for me, these archetypes are equally applicable to women and men. And for me, it's really useful in terms of looking at willpower and also separating will and power, because I think they individually speak to one particular archetype each. So just to go through very quickly this archetypal model. So The sovereign part of us is the part of us that ostensibly should be in charge. It's the part of us that has vision, that has ethics, idealism, that has a kind of vision for us in our lives. And it's the part of us that all the other three archetypes, in theory, well-functioning human being should serve. So the sovereign is really the leader of the kind of personality, the one with the vision, the one with the kind of ethics, if you like. The warrior part of us is the part of us that was responsible for action in the world, getting things done, for establishing boundaries, for saying a clear yes as well as a clear no, and also responsible for protection, putting up boundaries that protect us. But it's very much the aspect of us that gets stuff done, action in the world. The warrior in itself is actually kind of amoral. It just acts. It's other aspects of the personality that take care of ethics and things, and the reasons for acting. The magician archetype is all about our thinking capacities, our cognitions, our capacity to reflect. It's also where our kind of problem solving and fixing things, the capacities for those things lie. And then finally, there's the lover archetype, which is all about feeling and connection, moving out into the world, always wanting to connect and build. Very much about the kind of sensitivity of the feeling body, and aesthetics and beauty and all of those kinds of things. So for me, coming back to our topic around willpower, for me it's the sovereign aspect which where one finds will, and it's the warrior where one finds power. So for me, it's like a sovereign and warrior loop, willpower. Both need to be acting in concert. And if they're not acting in concert, if it's just your warrior which is online, then really life is going to look like a bull in a china shop. You're going to have a really, really big capacity to act, but you're just going to be blunderbussing around all over the place, not driven, not motivated by any values. Why am I doing this? Why am I acting in this way? So people who are very, very strong warrior, but with a low sovereign, actually can be pretty kind of scary in my experience and quite threatening. On the other hand, if someone is kind of low warrior but they're very high sovereign, there can be a lot of idealism, a lot of visioning, a lot of fantastic kind of what if I were to become this? What if this were to happen? But if the warrior is low, then there's no capacity to enact that, to make that manifest in the world. So interestingly, when I think of myself with these kind of quadrants, I often sort of do a bit of a rain check on myself and see where I'm at with these different archetypes. And generally, I kind of see myself as quite high lover, quite high magician. My warrior can be a bit low sometimes. And my sovereign, my sovereign is pretty strong at core, but just needs a bit of a kick up the bum to kind of show up sometimes. So when push comes to shove, my sovereign, my sense of who I am and what's right and wrong, really does show up quite strongly in the world, but sometimes it can be a bit slow in showing up. So there's a lot of work for me personally, I think, in the kind of warrior, in the warrior quadrant. So it might be something that people find useful to think about this topic in relation to and for themselves. So the invitation there is to take away what's useful. It can help me to kind of get a better sense of it. And also, I know that those archetypes are not the whole of me. There is a kind of soft lover part, and there is a thinking, contemplative, reflective part as well. And at the end of the day, they all need to come online and be working in concert for a healthy, fully functioning human being.
Can I speak to that a little bit?
Go ahead.
Stuff. I mean, it's a thing that comes up a lot in my coaching work. I tend to talk about using different lenses to kind of look at ourselves, and each lens has a particular kind of benefit and a particular slant that it puts on things. So the 4 archetype model is a great way to be able to look at ourselves and work out where we're strong and where we're weak and possible routes for development. And I think it's that last bit, especially since we're talking about developing willpower today. I think it's the utility of the model that's worth reinforcing. And I think that each of these four archetypes, and I think if we take some time to kind of inquire in ourselves, we can find each of those within us. And each of them has a particular feeling. And it's that feeling which is often the root, I believe, to a development in that area. So the feeling of a warrior, some of us feel that very strongly and very easily, and it's very easy to access. And then other people, very commonly, it leaves them a bit cold. They're not really sure what to do with it. Not really sure if it's okay to go there. Perhaps they have reluctance and mistrust around that forcefulness and that potentially destructive kind of drive. And then lover, okay, so I feel into my inner lover, my lover aspect, and I just notice how I shift and how my emotions are showing up differently, and I just feel a bit different in my body. And then I go to my magician kind of archetype, and then how does that feel? What does it feel like to inhabit that place and be a magician? If I step fully into that place, they can do some really interesting psychodrama stuff with this, where you set up some chairs, and each chair you sit in, and you're fully that archetype, and you ask that archetype, what do you have to say about this subject? And the sovereign, I think, is really important and complex, and personally, in my experience, both in my own work and in my coaching work, the sovereign is the most difficult one to develop, because it is so... We don't get a lot of examples of that through popular media. There are a lot of movies around warriors. There are a lot of books around lovers. But when do you see a king or a queen in their fullest raiment, in their fullest strength, and doing their job really, really well? And ultimately, the job, this is my interpretation, the job of the sovereign is to discern. It's to make the final decision. Listen to the court, listen to the other voices, impulses, and then make the decision. And it's always the sovereign. It's always your inner queen, your inner king, who is making the decision. And if that decision gets farmed out somewhere else to a different archetype, to a different aspect, to an unconscious aspect, that's where trouble creeps in. Again, this is my obsession with choice. I love this stuff because I always want to bring back to this idea that it's all choice. And it's our queen or it's our king that's making that choice. So let's bring this archetypal model back to this topic, developing willpower. And you said, Neil, that it's this interaction between the monarch, the sovereign, and the warrior. So how would you use that model, would you say, to develop willpower? And I'm asking you particularly because you said that this is a tricky area for you. So just reflecting on that, what do you think? Where do you go with this?
Well, where I go with it is, if I tune into an aspect of the sovereign, which I believe is about values and ethics, then for me, that's really helpful. So if I think about doing any action, performing any act, then for me, the question comes up, to what end? Why? Why is this important? What matters about this? So then that's where I look at, okay, what are my values? What do I value about things? So for me, a number of weeks ago, I think me and you, we did a very simple values exercise, didn't we? So some of the values that came up for me are things like connectedness, collaboration, community, self-expression, fun, kindness, joy, trust. So for me, I have to be able to tune into why is this important. Now, there's a bit of a rub there, in as much as like what you said earlier about sometimes we just have to get things done. And it may be that actually it might be a bit of a luxurious position to kind of think, well, is there one of these kind of values at the base of any of my actions? But then when I think about it, well, I just think, well, surely there must be something that matters about everything that I do, even if it's something that I don't enjoy doing. I might, take the washing up. I actually quite like washing up, but, on the times when I don't, I think, I could do anything but this. But actually, why does this matter? Well, it's about kind of being able to kind of have a clear mind. I want to tidy up for my partner. It's not just about me. So even something as mundane, maybe, as washing the dishes, it's important for me to kind of tune into, well, why am I doing this? Why is this important? Why does it matter? And I think, for me, Alexander, this is very much work in progress as I sort of speak this out. I think it's important for me that I find some kind of, even the smallest nugget of meaning, because the alternative is that I'm just doing something which has no meaning. And then for me, that becomes very sort of questionable, really. And there's a little bit more I'd like to say, just to kind of really bring this back to earth, really, for me. What I found, I use the example of starting my own business, starting my own coaching business. So what I find is that when I take really sort of small, incremental and sustainable steps, I have an experience of my own willpower, my own willfulness that actually works in terms of moving me forward with something. So my kind of tendency, my pattern, my way of working is to do that, have a felt sense of my own will power, and then sort of stop, consolidate, and then I can kind of venture back out again. And as I do this incrementally and cumulatively, then what I find is that more willpower builds. And I can have a greater sense of my own agency. So when I first was speaking about this, this sort of line between falling back and really going head on into something, I can begin to kind of find the line for me that is kind of healthy and balanced and involves some sort of stepping back and consolidating. I think you spoke to that earlier, didn't you, about doing something and then it wasn't rewarding yourself, but kind of almost re-energizing yourself, resting, I think you said. So, yeah, I just wanted to kind of give an example for me where that has worked, how I'm actually working with my willpower. Small steps, incrementally, having an experience of my own agency and my own power, and also giving myself small wins, basic thing from behavioral psychology, make a small win highly possible, so that it kind of builds muscles and builds kind of psychological and emotional muscles. Yeah, I'll finish there on that.
Yeah.
Anything you want to add to that or anything new to say?
Well, just a response to a couple of things you said there. So certainly that second thing is I think it's worth seeing willpower like a muscle. Like anything else you're trying to develop. And there's a book called Peak Performance, which I've spoken about before on this podcast. It's a very science-driven book about reaching your optimal level of performance in any given field. They talk about chess masters, they talk about athletes, and they talk about meditation a lot. They talk about mindfulness. In that, they're talking about periodization. That's the phrase for this thing. So I push for this period of time and then I rest for this period of time. And having the ratio between those being right, that differs between your field. But with anything you're developing, it's like developing a muscle. I will do the hard thing because that's how I develop, and then I will rest afterwards. And I also love your little bit there about, reward yourself as well. Acknowledge that you did this and maybe give yourself a little thing. But But in terms of developing willpower, it is about periodization. It's about deciding that you're going to do the thing, doing the hard thing, resting so that you recover, and then doing it again. And then building that into a habit that over time you become stronger in your will. That is how it works. And it is a thing that develops over time. It's a thing you tend not to notice happening. This has been my experience. You tend not to notice getting stronger with willpower. You tend to only look back over months or years and go, oh, hang on, I am easily doing all these things that I used to find really hard. For me, I bring this back to the gym. I wasn't able to lift that weight. I slowly, incrementally pushed myself to train and rest and train and rest. And then time passes and I notice myself picking something up quite easily and thinking, oh, hang on, I didn't used to be able to pick this up at all. And now it's quite easy for me. So I think that's kind of the methodology. I also think that So we talked about the archetypal thing and the relationship between the sovereign and the warrior. And, you've spoken very clearly about, not burning out, not overexerting, not doing things for no reason, having values behind the reason that we do things. And I agree with you that, even going and doing the job we hate day after day after day, if it pays the bills and makes us feel safe, maybe puts food on our kids' table, then it's supporting those values. That's the reason we do it. It does have value somewhere. We don't do things that have no meaning for us. But I think that all of this also, it calls us to ask some important questions which can give a whole extra avenue of growth here and can free us up in ways that we didn't really realize. So we're talking about the drive of the warrior, the discernment of the sovereign. We're talking about making sure you have values. The episode we did a while ago on vision, building a clear vision for where you want to get to. The sovereign will be checking, is this thing I'm doing important to move me towards my vision and make it more real? If it's not, don't do it. And if it is, then do it even if it's hard. But then that brings up this question, like, who am I doing this thing for? Because I feel like this is a often overlooked part that we often have to confront. And maybe this is worth doing an episode on at some point, but who am I doing this thing for? So I'm doing this hard thing. I'm enduring this hard thing. I'm having this hard conversation. I'm going and forcing myself to do this thing. Am I doing this for me? Am I doing this for my vision? Am I doing this for where I want to be in my life? Or am I doing it because it's what someone else wants me to do? Or it's what's expected of me? Or people like me are meant to do things like this, then I better do it. And breaking free from all of those external decision makers. I mean, this is why choice is something I harp on about so much, because so many of our choices are farmed out to other people if we don't think about it. They're farmed out to our peers, our work colleagues, our partners, our parents, our children, possibly, our culture around us. We just allow all of that to make so many of our choices for us. So, we're talking about developing willpower today. If you are making your choices broadly based on someone else's expectation for you, then there's probably not going to be an awful lot to give. Because what's your drive? You're just trying to keep up. You're just trying to do what's expected of you. That's not working towards a vision. That you're not consulting your values. Your sovereign isn't involved. Your warrior will just push you in whatever direction your warrior chooses to push. And, in this scenario, perhaps you haven't developed your warrior very strongly. You haven't felt into that place. You haven't stoked that fire. So I think all of these conversations, I think this is fascinating stuff. And this is why I love what I do. All this stuff brings up extra questions. So here, I think the question is, who are you doing this thing for? And if you're doing it for you, then make sure it's heading in the right direction.
It feels like we've covered a lot, actually, in a very short space of time. Before we finish off, is there any kind of final kind of takeaway or thing for you, Alexander, on this topic of willpower?
Just one very little practical thing. So in order to develop this muscle, in order to stoke your warrior, in order to just get used to getting more things done, there's just some very basic things we can put in place. So not allowing ourselves places to hide. So what do you want to do? Get really, really clear. So specific, go and look up the SMART method, SMART. Make sure that the goals you're setting are smart. And then once you're really clear on what those goals are, then put time in your calendar when you're going to do it. So put in an hour or two when you're going to do this thing. And put a reminder on a device, perhaps on your phone, to pop up and remind you. And if you've got anyone you can tell, then tell somebody you're doing it between this hour and this hour. So that keeps you accountable. That makes it a little bit more real. If you struggle to do things, and it's simple stuff like that. So just what exactly am I trying to achieve? When will I do it? And letting someone who will hold me accountable know that that's what my intention is. And doing that relentlessly, just over time, developing that muscle. So maybe you start off doing a smaller amount of time if it's something you really hate or something you have huge resistance around. And around your resistances. There's a lot of growth and reflection and development to do there to understand what's causing the resistance. But we're talking particularly here about getting stuff done. So just that. Just when are you doing it? What are you doing? And then when that minute comes around, the beginning of that hour where you're going to do it, you are in the place with the resources you need. You've cleared the space. You've made sure there's not going to be distractions, and then you do the thing. And that's kind of it, really. Yeah, so that's the last thing I wanted to say. Just a bit of practical advice.
Great, thanks ever so much. Okay, last thing I really want to say is just a note about language, really. And this only came to me today as I was thinking about how I speak to myself about this, about willpower, the stories I kind of create for myself. So I'm a great believer in language being very important, and to a degree it's shaping our experience and reality. Not entirely, but to a degree. So rather than taking an old story phrase of mine like pushing on through, I can choose to language and think about it differently in terms of like taking small, incremental, sustainable steps, then rest, then go again, which is has much greater utility value. And then rather than having some kind of negative connotation about imposing my will on someone, for me, it's more about harnessing my will. So just this morning and in preparation for this podcast, I really thought about how do I language this stuff for myself? How am I speaking to myself? Because a lot of the time I'll be convincing myself that I can't do things, when in actual fact, if I were to suspend that belief, that judgment, then I might find out that I have greater capacity to do things than I actually do. And I actually have discovered that to be the case. So that's my last bit. Yeah, a bit about kind of language, and just be aware of how you're self-storying and what you're telling yourself around your capacities to do stuff. Okay, time is up for us today, Alexander. So thank you everybody for listening. If you want to get in touch with us individually, what's the best way for people to get in touch with you, Alexander?
If you want to get in touch with me, then go onto my website, which is deepcoaching.co.uk. And in the top right-hand corner, you'll see a big blue button. You can either book in a consultation with me, or if you just want to have a conversation, then there's also a way through there to find a contact form, and you can just write me a quick email. I'd love to hear from you.
Thank you very much. And for me, you can get in touch with me. Best way is through my website, www.coachingforlifefroome.co.uk, and just follow the link to the contact details and get in touch. You're very welcome to. So last thing to say, I think, is that next time around in a couple of weeks, we will be doing an episode on death and dying. This is a request from one of the people who listens to the podcast regularly, Richard. So thank you, Richard, for suggesting that.
Hi, Richard.
And it's such a massive topic. So we might do a series on death and dying. We think it's a really, really important topic. There's lots to say about it, not least how kind of we avoid these kind of discussions around death and dying in our culture. So that is what we'll be doing in a couple of weeks' time. That may well be a series. And we very much hope that you can join us for that. Until then, it's a very goodbye from me, and I'll see you next time.
And it's a goodbye from me, and I'm going to go and break my fast.